Colonel Hayes was driving through New York City when the first transport touched down in Central Park. He saw the flash of light in his mirror and heard the explosion that followed. His hands gripped the steering wheel as sirens erupted across the city. He turned the car around immediately. His daughter Sophie was in school 20 blocks away. The radio crackled with panic. Every station reported the same thing: ships, massive ships appearing from nowhere, touching down in Tokyo, Moscow, and Los Angeles at the same time. The world had been invaded. Drove hard through traffic. People abandoned their cars and ran. Some screamed. Others stood frozen, staring up at the sky where three massive vessels hung like dark clouds. The ships were not sleek or advanced looking. They were brutal and ugly, all sharp angles and black metal that seemed to swallow light. By the time reached Sophie's school, soldiers in silver suits were already moving through the streets. They were not human. Their bodies were too tall, too thin, with too many joints in their limbs. They moved with mechanical precision, herding people like cattle toward transport gates that opened in the middle of blocks. Ran into the school. The hallways were empty. His heart pounded against his ribs. He found Sophie in the gymnasium with 300 other children. Teachers were trying to keep them calm, but it was useless. The children knew something was wrong. Some cried. Others sat in shocked silence. "Dad," Sophie said when she saw him. She was 12 years old with her mother's dark hair and smart eyes. She ran to him and he held her tight. A soldier entered the gymnasium. Its head was smooth and hard like a crab shell. It had 4 arms and no eyes that could see, just ridges along its face. Its voice came from a device on its chest, translated into perfect English. "All humans will come with us. Resistance will result in termination." His mind raced. He could try to fight. He was a soldier. He knew combat. But there were 50 of these creatures in the gymnasium alone, and they had weapons that made no sound but left people burned and dead on the floor. "It's okay," he whispered to Sophie. "Stay close to me." They were pushed toward the transport gate with the other children. The process was efficient and cold. Each person walked through the gate and disappeared into a white light, felt Sophie's hand shake in his. When they reached the front of the line, tried to stay with her, but a soldier's arm blocked him. The limb was not soft. It was hard and sharp-edged. "Children separate from adults," the device said. "No," said, "she is my daughter." The soldier did not move, did not respond. It simply pushed him backward with force that knocked the air from his lungs. Sophie was pulled away screaming, lunged forward, but 3 more soldiers grabbed him. He fought them, but there were too many. He watched his daughter disappear into white light and could do nothing. Across the city, the same thing happened in schools, parks, and hospitals. Any place where children gathered. 200 humans from New York alone. Thousands more from cities around the world. Doctor was in her laboratory in Boston when soldiers came through the windows. She was studying protein structures, completely unaware that the world above her had changed. They took her son, age 8, from his school in the suburbs. He was in the reading group with Mrs. when they came. She tried to protect him. The soldiers removed her easily and took through a gate that led to darkness. Captain Ford was commanding the North American space defense when the ships appeared on radar. He had 5 minutes of warning before the first weapon hit. The base filled with red light and alarm sounds. Ford ordered strikes immediately. Missiles launched. Nuclear warheads detonated in the upper atmosphere. The alien ships did not even slow down. 2 minutes later, the space defense base no longer existed. Captain Ford was the only command officer to survive. He hid in a sublevel bunker as the base burned above him. When he finally emerged 6 hours later, New York was gone. Los Angeles was burning. Moscow had been flattened, was silent. Humanity had not even slowed them down. The transport ships filled with captured children. In the hold of the largest vessel, 2,000 children sat in rows of seats designed for bodies that were not human. The seats were hard and the air was cold. Many of the children cried. Some held hands with children they had just met. Some sat alone in shock. Emma was in that hold. She was 14 years old and smart in ways that let her see things other people missed. She was in the back row and she was already thinking, already calculating, already trying to understand. Next to her sat, also 14, who had been caught on his way home from soccer practice. He was tall and strong, but his hands shook. Across from them was a group of 8-year-olds who were too young to understand what had happened. One of them was Son. He was small and afraid and clutching a school notebook he had been carrying when they took him. "Does anyone know where we are going?" one child asked. No one answered. The ship vibrated as it lifted off. The children felt gravity shift beneath them. They were leaving Earth. On the bridge of the command vessel, the navigator made a report in its own language. No sound came from its mouth. Communication happened through vibrations in their bodies that translated to electronic signals. The ship's intelligence system converted the message to English for its data files. 200 human young collected. The species is primitive and weak. No resistance was possible. The Empire will find uses for them. The captain of the vessel called, acknowledged the report. The Empire had conquered 15 star systems. They had eliminated civilizations far more advanced than these humans. One developing world posed no threat. The cargo was simply a bonus, a resource to be used and discarded. The ships jumped to hyperspace. Earth disappeared from their sensors and became just another memory of conquest. But on Earth, something else was beginning. Colonel Hayes sat in a military detention facility because the base commander did not know what else to do with him. He had been identified as high command. The government was in chaos. 3 presidents were dead. 2 nuclear arsenals had been destroyed. Civilization was not a world that welcomed life. The sky was dark purple and filled with dust from the mining operations that covered the continents. Black obsidian towers rose from the ground like teeth. The oceans were not water but liquid metal that reflected nothing. Life existed here only because they had built it this way. The transport ships landed in a facility designed to process captured species. The building was a maze of corridors and chambers cut from stone that had been fused until it was harder than diamond. The children were moved through these corridors in groups. Some were taken to labor camps. Others were led deeper into the facility toward the research section. Emma walked with and about 90 other children. They had been separated from the younger ones. A scientist had examined them and decided they were old enough to be useful for studies. The scientist had 4 arms. 2 held data devices. The other 2 remained empty, but they moved constantly, as if the being was always calculating, always measuring. The chamber they entered was white and clean. Instruments lined the walls, testing equipment hung from the ceiling. It was a place designed to hurt and study. They did not hide this. They had no shame about it. Pain was information. Fear was useful data. The species was too primitive to understand, so the process was explained as if the children were already dead. A voice came from a speaker in the wall. It was controlled and clear. It did not sound angry or happy. It was simply neutral, the way a computer would sound. You are now subjects in the Advanced Resilience Study. The Empire seeks to understand why your species has survived on such a hostile world. Testing will occur in multiple phases. Cooperation will reduce suffering. Resistance will be noted but will not change outcomes. You will be tested daily. Sleep will be rationed. Nutrition will be provided at minimal survival levels. Your emotional responses will be measured. Your physical responses will be recorded. Some of you will not survive this process. This is acceptable. The speaker went silent. Emma felt her hands clench into fists. She was smart enough to understand what was happening. They were being treated like laboratory animals. They saw them as objects, things, not people, not worth killing with mercy, just worth studying to death. "Stay calm," she whispered too. "We need to survive this." "How?" he asked. "I do not know yet, but we will find a way." The tests began immediately. They measured human pain tolerance by applying heat to different parts of the body. They measured psychological resilience by forcing children to watch the suffering of other children. They measured adaptability by suddenly changing temperature and pressure in the testing chambers. It was systematic and relentless. But something unexpected happened. The children did not break the way they expected. Yes, they suffered. Yes, some of them cried, but they did not stop thinking. They did not stop caring for each other. They created signals and codes to communicate when they were not watching. They helped younger children survive the tests by whispering encouragement. They formed bonds that became their own small nation inside the facility. Emma became their leader not because she fought or was strong, but because she was smart and she was calm. She had started learning the language from the moment they arrived. She watched how the scientists moved and what they responded to. She understood patterns. Within 3 weeks, she could predict what the tests would be. She could warn the others. She could prepare them mentally. One of the researchers was named. It was one of the 4-armed beings, but it was different from the others. It spent more time watching the children than testing them. It made notes that did not seem to be standard procedure. It asked questions that seemed to have nothing to do with pain resistance. One day, while Emma was being tested on a machine that measured her response to electrical stimulation, stopped the test early. The other scientists looked at it with confusion translated through their bodies in ripples of what might have been anger. Translation device spoke. This subject shows organizational capacity. It influences other subjects toward cooperation. It alters behavior patterns of the group. This is not baseline human behavior. This indicates social complexity beyond the preliminary assessment. Another scientist responded, "So what? The species is still primitive. It will still die when the study ends." But was not convinced. Something about watching the children organize their survival, watching them care for one another, watching them choose hope over despair, seemed to contradict what the Empire had decided about humanity. Began to ask different questions. It discovered that humans formed something called family bonds, that humans would suffer to protect younger humans, that humans could learn language patterns in just weeks when the species was supposed to be unable to process nonlinear communication, that humans would organize in ways that benefited the group even when individual survival was more likely. The reports that came from began to contradict the official assessment of humanity, but no one important was reading them. Meanwhile, in the labor camps, was working in the mining tunnels. He was 8 years old and small, so they gave him work that required going into spaces that larger beings could not reach. His fingers bled from the sharp rock. His lungs burned from the dust. But he survived because Emma had managed to get word to him through a network of children who knew other children who worked in the camps. "Stay alive," her message said. "Someone is coming for you." Did not know if that was true, but he held on to it anyway. Hope was the only thing that could not measure or control. Back on Earth, Colonel Hayes was standing in a facility that had been secret for 40 years. It was buried 3 kilometers under the desert near Area 51, Nevada. Inside the facility were the remains of a probe that had crashed on Earth decades earlier. The probe had been studied by the best human minds available, and from studying that probe, humans had learned just enough to know that faster-than-light travel was theoretically possible. But theory was not the same as practice. Captain Ford was there as well. So was Doctor, who had abandoned her research to work on the only project that mattered. Around them were physicists, engineers, programmers, and soldiers. Every skilled person the government could find. Every resource that could be spared. "We have 18 months, said to the room. "We do not know if the children are still alive. We do not know if we can build this, but we have to try." Doctor spoke. "The power requirements alone are impossible. We would need to generate energy on a scale that would destroy any city we tried it in." "Then we build the facility where there are no cities," said. "The trajectory calculations are too complex," said Dr. James Cooper, the lead engineer. "We do not have computers fast enough." "We will build faster ones," said. No one smiled, but no one left. They all knew what would happen if they did not try. The children would remain in slavery, or they would die in those laboratories, or they would be discarded when they were done studying them. The project began in absolute silence. No news, no announcements. Just human beings working with the facility under the Nevada desert had been expanded to 10 times its original size. Buildings had been buried deeper. New chambers had been carved out of stone. Power plants had been constructed. Laboratories filled with equipment that pushed the boundaries of human knowledge existed in darkness 3 kilometers below the surface. 18 months. That was how long they had to do something that should have taken 50 years. Doctor had not slept more than 4 hours a day in that entire time. Her son was out there somewhere, on a world that humans could not yet reach, in a situation that she could not bear to think about directly. So instead, she pushed herself and everyone around her forward through the problem of faster-than-light travel. The probe that had crashed on Earth had been built with materials that humans did not naturally occur on the planet. The probe's systems were incomprehensible at first, but Doctor had discovered something important. The probe did not work the way human physics said it should work. They had discovered something about the fabric of space that allowed them to fold it, to bend it, to move through it in ways that seemed impossible. "Space is not what we think it is," she told Colonel Hayes in the observation room. Around them, technicians worked on the master model of the ship they were building. "They understand that space can be compressed. They create temporary tunnels through dimensions we have barely started to theorize about. If we can replicate their process, we can travel to their system in weeks instead of years. Listened, he was a soldier, not a scientist, but he had learned enough to understand that what they were attempting was impossible, and yet they were doing it anyway. Can we do it? He asked. We have to, said. That is the only answer that matters. The ship took shape in orbit. It was called the New Dawn, and it did not look like human ships or ships. It looked like what happens when two civilizations try to work together in the wreckage of one's knowledge. The hull was part human steel, part composite material. The engines were a hybrid design that should not have worked but did. The weapon systems were human engineering combined with principles. It was the most ambitious project humanity had ever attempted. Captain Ford commanded the construction in orbit. He had hand-selected 3,000 soldiers and specialists to be the crew. They trained constantly. They studied tactics from the fragments of data humans had gathered. They prepared for a war that might already be lost before it began. But Ford did not believe it was lost. He believed that humanity had something they did not expect. He believed that humans fought differently, that humans did not calculate war like a computer. They fought like they had something to lose, because they did. Hayes spent his time planning the campaign. He had access to every piece of intelligence the government could gather. He knew the layout of Prime. He knew where the children were being kept. He knew the strength of the Empire's military forces in that region of space. They had never fought a war against a species that was not already spacefaring. They had no experience with primitive worlds that suddenly developed technology. Their military doctrine assumed either total domination or complete annihilation. They did not plan for resistance from the conquered. This was their weakness. Designed his campaign around this weakness. He would not try to match the in strength. He would strike where they were not expecting it. He would hit their command structure. He would disrupt their coordination. He would make them react instead of act. And in that space where they were disorganized and uncertain, he would rescue the children and escape. It was a plan that required perfection, but Hayes had become a man who no longer believed in impossible. His daughter was somewhere on a hostile world. The only way forward was to stop believing in limits. The New Dawn was launched with a crew of 3,000. They were sent off with a ceremony that the government kept secret. No crowds, no news, just a ship disappearing into space with humanity's only chance of rescue aboard. On Prime, the children had begun to change. They had been captive for 16 months. The younger ones had grown. The older ones had become harder, more strategic, more ready. Emma had managed to establish a communication network across the entire facility. Children in the labor camps could send messages to children in the research section. Children in the detention areas could coordinate with children in the training centers. It was not a rebellion, not yet, but it was preparation. Emma was now 15 years old. She had learned to speak fluently. She had memorized the routes through the facility. She had studied the guards' patterns. She had counted the exits and calculated the odds. She was waiting for something. She did not know what, but she felt it coming. Was with her, they had become something like a command team. He was stronger. She was smarter. Together, they had kept hundreds of children alive through conditions that should have killed them. Was still in the mines, but he was no longer alone. Other children worked beside him. They had learned to work together to help each other stay alive. They had become a unit. And above them, no alarm bells had been triggered. No defense protocol had been activated, because they did not believe that Earth was capable of spacefaring technology. They did not monitor the skies for threats. They watched the galaxy with confidence that came from centuries of dominance. The New Dawn exited hyperspace at the system with all weapons hot and ready for war. The tactical systems had been updated with every piece of data that humans had acquired. The crew was ready. The mission was clear. Colonel Hayes stood on the bridge of the ship. Around him were officers and specialists from 6 different nations, united by a single purpose. He looked at the star system before them. Prime was the largest planet. It hung in space like a dark gem. "All stations report ready," Captain Ford announced. Hayes took a breath. He thought of his daughter Sophie. He thought of the 200 children that had been taken. He thought of and the thousands of people who had worked to make this moment possible. He activated the communication system. "This is Colonel Hayes of the Terran Defense Force commanding the New Dawn. To the Empire, I have a message. You took something that belongs to us. You took our children. You took their futures. You took their freedom. We have come across the stars to take them back. He paused. You have 12 hours to release every human captive. If you do not, we will destroy everything you. The command center erupted in alarm. Sensors screamed warnings across multiple frequencies. The massive human vessel had appeared at the edge of the system, and it was moving toward Prime with weapons armed and shields active. The military commanders were confused. This was not possible. Earth had no technology. Earth had no capability. And yet the signatures on the screens could not be. A ship was there. A large ship, moving with precision toward their world. The commander of the station was a being who had never experienced real doubt. The Empire had conquered 15 systems. The military had never lost a significant engagement. Primitive species died when they were told to die. They did not resist. They did not build ships. They did not cross the stars. But they had and had to respond. Launch the patrol fleet, he commanded. Destroy that ship before it reaches weapons range of the planet. 600 fighter craft launched from the orbital stations. They moved in perfect formation, a swarm of smaller ships designed to overwhelm through numbers. They accelerated toward the new dawn with firing weapons ready. Captain Ford watched the formation approach on his tactical screen. He had trained his pilots for this moment, every scenario, every possibility. He had learned from studying military tactics that they fought in rigid patterns. They valued efficiency over flexibility. They attacked in waves. All fighters, this is command. Launch immediately, full assault pattern Delta. 300 human fighters launched from the new dawn. They were smaller than the craft, less armored, designed for agility instead of power. But they had human pilots, and human pilots thought differently. The two fleets collided in space above Prime. The first human pilot was a woman named Sarah. She had her child at home on Earth. She had volunteered for this mission because she could not live in a world where children suffered slavery. She flew her fighter directly into the formation and fired everything she had. 2 ships exploded in the first 10 seconds. All around her, human pilots were doing the same thing. They flew with reckless courage. They attacked formation points that would cause maximum disruption. They targeted shields and engines and communication systems. They fought with technical precision. The humans fought like they had nothing to lose because they did not. Within minutes, 30 ships were burning, then 50, then 100. The human fighters were taking losses. 3 had been destroyed already. A dozen were damaged, but they were trading 1 for 5, 1 for 6. They had never faced this kind of combat. Ordered a second wave launched. 200 more fighters screamed into space. On the new dawn, Colonel Hayes watched the engagement. His jaw was tight. He was seeing his pilots die, each one a person with family waiting at home, but he was also seeing something else. They were breaking formation. They were panicking. They were making tactical mistakes. Ready the main gun, he said. When the second wave launches, target the launch platform. The new dawn's main weapon was something that human science had barely understood. It combined human nuclear physics with energy theory. When it fired, it did not create a small explosion. It created a cascade reaction that spread through the station's power system. The launch platform erupted. The second wave of fighters never left the docking bays. Hundreds of them died in the explosion, ships and pilots both. Felt something close to what humans would recognize as fear. This should not be possible. This was not how warfare worked. The humans should be desperate and panicked. Instead, they were winning. How was this possible? Below on Prime, the children felt the explosions. The facility shook. Emergency lights came on in the corridors. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Emma moved. Now, she said simply. The children who worked in the facility had prepared for this moment. They had organized. They had located keys. They had disabled security doors from the inside. They had built a map of every corridor and every exit, and they had waited for chaos to give them their chance. Emma led a group of 30 older children toward the detention blocks, moved a separate group toward the storage area where emergency supply kits had been gathered. Another child named David led 20 younger ones toward the main exit. They did not have weapons. They did not have armor. They had only speed and organization and desperation. The guards were in chaos. Many had been called to defend the station against the attack above. The children had the advantage of knowing the facility perfectly. Emma moved through corridors like she had lived there her whole life. They released imprisoned children as they moved. The group grew. 10, 20, 50, 100. was in the mines when the tremors stopped the work. A supervisor began shouting orders, but then communications went dead. The supervisor looked confused. For the first time, it was not in control. A child named Daniel who worked near whispered urgently, "The time is now, follow me." They ran through the tunnels, stayed close. Around them, dozens of other children were moving in the same direction. Someone above them had planned this. Someone above them knew what to do. In orbit, the battle had become vicious and close. The New Dawn was trading hits with what remained of the patrol fleet, but the human ship had been designed differently. Its hull could take punishment and keep moving. Its weapons were more accurate. Its crew was more motivated. 20 ships were left when the last human fighter was launched. The New Dawn closed distance. It became a ship-to-ship battle, and the humans had both the advantage and the will. Weapons fire lit up the space above the planet. The last ship exploded. "Prepare landing craft," Ford commanded. "Get those children out of there." The New Dawn launched shuttles with a complete rescue team. They descended through the atmosphere toward the facility, and in those shuttles were soldiers whose only job was to bring the children home. The facility's main exit opened. Emma emerged with 150 children behind her. The sky above was smoke and chaos. The ground beneath them shook with impacts. They ran. The first shuttle landed and soldiers in combat gear jumped out. They were human. They were there to save them. Emma had never felt such a combination of relief and shock in her entire life. They were real. The rescue was real. Humanity had come. The soldiers moved fast, gathering children, getting them aboard the shuttles. Emma counted. She needed to know if everyone was accounted for. She helped children move faster. She encouraged the slow ones. She made sure the younger ones got loaded first. But was not with this group. She looked around desperately, had gone to secure medical supplies, had he made it out. A shuttle descended nearby, emerged with 200 other children. He was carrying a child who could not walk. He was alive. Emma felt something break open in her chest. Relief, hope, the possibility that they might survive this. The shuttles took off loaded with children. Behind them, the facility was falling apart. Explosions echoed through the tunnels. They had initiated self-destruct protocols on the research equipment. They would rather destroy the evidence of what they had done than let humans retrieve it. The shuttles rose toward the New Dawn. The children packed inside watched through windows as Prime fell away beneath them. They watched the orbital station that had held them captive burning in space. On the bridge of the New Dawn, Hayes received the report. All children accounted for, all shuttles returning, rescue successful. 800 soldiers were dead. 300 more were wounded. The ship had taken catastrophic damage in multiple sections. The engines were barely functional. They had minutes to escape before reinforcements from other stations could arrive. "Set course for Earth," commanded. "Jump to hyperspace as soon as the shuttles are aboard." "We are not going to finish the campaign," his first officer asked. Looked at the children on the internal cameras. They were being processed through the medical section. Some were crying, some were silent in shock, some were holding each other. "The campaign was always just about the children," he said. "We got them, we jump now." The last shuttle attached to the New Dawn, the docking bay sealed, and the massive ship's engines powered up for the jump that would take them home. Behind them, they sent 3 battle fleets in pursuit, but the New Dawn was already jumping through hyperspace. By the time the fleets coordinated their response, the humans were gone. The Empire had been embarrassed, their fleet had been defeated, their station had been damaged. 1,700 humans and their children were escaping to the stars. Sat in his command center and made a calculation. The military could catch the human ship. The human ship was damaged, but catching it would require a coordinated response across multiple stations and systems. It would require unity. It would require believing that a primitive species was actually a threat. Did not believe it yet. He thought that the humans had gotten lucky, that they had used alien technology they did not understand, that they would be easy to crush once they were isolated. He was the last commander of the Empire to think this way. Within weeks, systems would begin to question the military's leadership. Within months, the outer colonies would start to wonder if the Empire was truly as strong as it claimed. The galaxy had learned that a young species could stand against and they had learned that they were not invincible. In the medical section of the New Dawn, children were reunited with adults. Sophie found her father. Found. The scenes were quiet and profound. Parents held their children and could not speak. Children cried not from fear but from relief. The journey home through hyperspace took 5 weeks. The New Dawn was damaged in 7 different sections. One engine was barely functional. The power systems were operating at 70% capacity. But the ship moved forward, and every day that passed took the children farther from closer to Earth. The medical teams worked constantly. Children had been starved, some had wounds from the research experiments, others had psychological trauma that would take years to process. But they were alive, and being alive was enough for now. Colonel Hayes stood in the medical section one day, watching the doctors tend to the children. He moved through the rows of beds, looking at each face, checking on their condition. Most of them smiled at him when they saw him. He was the man who had come to rescue them. He was humanity made solid. Sophie was in a corner bed, sitting up and eating. She was thin and pale, but her eyes were alert. When she saw her father, she stood and hugged him. He held her and did not let go for a long time. "You came," she said. "Of course I came," he said. "I will always come for you." Across the section, sat with her son. He was small still, but he was eating. He was telling her about the mines, about the other children, about Emma who had organized their survival. Listened and held his hand, and thanked whatever forces in the universe had brought him back to her alive. Emma was not in the medical section. She was in the communications center of the ship, helping the crew document what had happened on Prime. The officers had realized quickly that her knowledge of the facility and though was invaluable, so they used her as a consultant while her wounds healed. She told them about the layout of the research section. She described the security systems. She explained the command structure. She drew maps of the labor camps and explained the patterns of the guards. The officers listened carefully. They were already beginning to think about what would come next. "They will send warships," Emma said with the certainty of someone who had lived among them. "The Empire will not forget this. They will not forgive it. They will want revenge." "We have FTL technology now," Ford said. "Earth has the ability to build ships. When they come, we will be ready." "You do not understand," Emma said. "They have been at war with hundreds of species. They have systems. They have tactics. They have weapons that humans have not seen. Rescuing us was one thing. Protecting Earth is another." "Then we will have to get better," Ford said simply. The bridge crew watched space as the New Dawn moved through hyperspace. The journey was dangerous. They had damaged engines and a crippled ship. If anything went wrong, they would not have the power to escape. But nothing did go wrong. The hyperspace corridor held steady. The quantum calculations that had been done by machines that did not exist a year ago proved accurate. They would make it home. The Empire, in the aftermath of the rescue, was in chaos, not immediate collapse. The Empire was too vast and too militarily strong for that, but cracks had appeared in the authority structure. Worlds that had questioned them for centuries suddenly began to wonder if the time had come to rebel. Vassal species that had lived in fear started to calculate whether they might be able to fight back. An emergency session of the Galactic Council was convened. Representatives from dozens of civilizations met in a vast chamber on a neutral world. The news had spread across the galaxy. A primitive species had defeated the Empire. A young species had crossed the stars and rescued their young. The implications were staggering. Some representatives demanded that Earth be destroyed immediately before humanity could grow strong enough to threaten the entire galaxy. Others argued that humans had shown they understood the value of mercy, that they had not destroyed the facility or the station, that they had killed soldiers but not civilians, that perhaps this young species could be negotiated with. The debate raged for days. In the end, the Council decided to wait, to observe, to see what humanity would do next. Because if there was one thing that the battle at Prime had proven, it was that humans were unpredictable, and the galaxy had learned to respect unpredictability. The New Dawn exited hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Earth hung before them, blue and green and alive. The children who pressed against the observation windows had thought they would never see it again. Many of them cried. Some of them laughed. Some of them simply stared, unable to process the reality that they had made it. Hayes ordered a direct approach to Earth. He wanted no delays. He wanted these children home. The media reported the return as the greatest moment in human history. Ships were sent to greet the New Dawn. Governments made statements. Celebrations were prepared. But those who had been on the New Dawn knew that the real story was not about celebration. It was about what would come next. The ship entered Earth's atmosphere and began its descent toward the primary landing zone. The re-entry was rough. The ship pushed beyond its normal limits, but it held together. It touched down in a valley in the Rocky Mountains, a secured military facility. The children disembarked onto Earth soil. Many of them knelt down and touched the ground. Some cried. Others stood silently, unable to express what they felt. They had been taken from Earth. They had been enslaved. They had suffered. And they had survived, and they were home. Walked beside as he stepped onto Earth. He looked up at the sun and squinted. The light was different from what Prime had offered. This light was warm. It was alive. "We made it," said. "We did," said. "We made it." Emma and stood together, watching the reunion scenes. Parents were finding their children. Children were finding their parents. The facility was filled with tears and laughter and hugs that lasted until everyone was exhausted. Colonel Hayes gave a public address before the day ended. He spoke to the families who had gathered and to the world watching through cameras. "We went to the stars," he said, "and we brought our children home. We faced an enemy that was superior in every way except one. We had something they did not expect. We had the will to do whatever was necessary to protect the young. We had the love that makes a species capable of impossible things." He paused. But this is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning. The galaxy knows now that humanity exists. The galaxy knows now that we are willing to fight. The galaxy knows now that we will not abandon our own, and they know now that they are not invincible. We have much to do, we have much to learn, we have a world to heal and a future to build. But we will do it together, because that is what humanity does. We survive, we adapt, we grow, and we never ever leave anyone behind. The speech was simple, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened, everything that humanity had done to reach the stars, everything that they had sacrificed. In the days that followed, scientists began analyzing the technology that had been captured from the station. Engineers began designing new ships. The military began planning for defense. The government began negotiating with other species who had sent messages of support. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had announced its arrival not with peaceful first contact, but with a rescue mission that had humbled the Empire. The galaxy would have to adjust to this new reality. Emma was 16 years old when she stood in front of the United Nations General Assembly 2 months later. She had been invited to speak about her experience. She was no longer just a child who had suffered. She was a witness. She was a voice. She was a symbol of humanity's capacity to survive. She spoke about the research facility. She spoke about the other children. She spoke about their certainty that humans were primitive and weak. She spoke about how they had misunderstood what it meant to be human. "They measured our pain tolerance," Emma said. "They measured our physical responses. They measured every biological function and came to the conclusion that we were weak because we felt things. They thought that emotions made us primitive. But emotions are our strength. Love made us build a ship that should not exist. Love made us cross the stars. Love made parents sacrifice themselves so their children could live. They did not understand that humanity is not defined by weapons or technology. We are defined by what we will do for each other." The assembly was silent after she spoke, because she had said something that the galaxy needed to hear. Strength was not just about power. Sometimes strength was about caring. Sometimes strength was about sacrifice. Sometimes strength was about never giving up on the people you loved. The memorial to the fallen soldiers was built within a year, 800 names. The dedication ceremony was attended by thousands. Parents stood beside the memorial of their children who had died to save the captive children. Wives stood beside the memorial of their husbands. Children stood beside the memorial of their fathers. Hayes attended the ceremony. He stood at the monument for a long time, reading names. He thought about Ford, the captain who had survived the original attack and who had died in the final assault on the station. He thought about Sarah, the pilot who had flown directly into the formation. He thought about all of them. They had not died for nothing. The children lived because of them. That had to be enough. Earth began the long process of becoming a spacefaring civilization. The New Dawn was repaired and refitted. New ships were built. New weapons were designed. Humanity was preparing for the future because they knew that they would not forget. The Empire would not forgive. But humanity was ready now. They had learned that the impossible was possible. They had learned that a young species could stand against an empire. They had learned that there was nothing worth more than the safety of their children. The stars had watched as a developing world was invaded and colonized. The stars had watched as children were enslaved. And the stars had watched as those children were rescued by a species that had crossed the darkness to bring them home. The empire would eventually fall, not in the immediate years, but eventually. The galaxy had learned that they were not invincible, and the seeds of rebellion had been planted across 100 worlds. It had started with the rescue of 200 children. It had started with humanity's refusal to accept loss. It had started with the willingness to do the impossible. And when the historians looked back on this period, they would not call it the day humans met they would call it the day the stars learned to fear humanity. Because humanity had come to the stars not for conquest or profit or power. Humanity had come to the stars for 3 years had passed since the rescue. Earth was no longer the same world it had been. The technology captured from the had accelerated human development by centuries. Cities now had vertical cities built above them. Transportation moved through the air on energy systems that old physics. Power generation came from sources that made fossil fuels obsolete. But more importantly, humanity had changed. The population understood that they were no longer alone. They understood that somewhere in the darkness of space other species existed. Some of them were dangerous, some of them were watching, and some of them were wondering if Earth was becoming a threat. Colonel Hayes had been promoted to general. He now commanded all of Earth's space defenses and oversaw the construction of the space fleet. The title meant little to him. What mattered was the work. Every ship built was a promise to the children of Earth that he would never allow what happened 3 years ago to happen again. He stood in the orbital shipyard and watched the construction of the vessel. It was called the Hammer, and it was designed for one purpose. It was a warship, not a rescue vessel, not a science ship, a warship, because had learned that the galaxy respected force more than it respected anything else. Captain Ford, the man who had led the first rescue mission, was still alive, though. He had been wounded in the final assault on the station. The doctors had told him he would never command a ship again. But Ford had ignored them. He was training the pilots of the new fleet now, passing on what he had learned in battle. They think in straight lines, he told a class of pilots. They attack in formations, they defend in patterns, that is their weakness. We flew circles around them, we went places they did not expect. We thought like humans, which means we thought in ways they could not predict. That is how you survive against a superior enemy. You do not fight on their terms, you fight on your own. Doctor had returned to her research, but now she was studying technology for military applications. She worked in a facility that was no longer secret. The governments of Earth had decided that transparency was better than secrecy. The population knew what was being built. They knew why, and they supported it. Her son was now 11 years old. He had adjusted to being home, though he still had nightmares about the mines on Prime. Had arranged for him to speak with other children who had been rescued. Talking to each other helped. Knowing that others had survived the same trauma made the pain feel less lonely. Emma was 19 years old now. She had been recruited by the Earth Intelligence Agency. Her knowledge of language and culture was invaluable. She was being trained as a diplomat and negotiator. The government believed that Earth would eventually need to engage with other species, and Emma was one of the few humans who understood alien thinking. But Emma had also become something else. She had become a symbol. When young people saw her, they saw a survivor. They saw someone who had endured slavery and come out stronger. They saw a symbol of what humanity could do when backed into a corner. She was being sent to a secret location today. A facility where the government was preparing for the possibility of contact with other species. But other civilizations that might be interested in what humanity had become. The first contact came not from but from a species called They were traders. They moved between systems, buying and selling technology and resources. They had heard about humanity through the galactic networks. They wanted to know if Earth was interested in trade. The message was received by Earth's new diplomatic department. A council of specialists met to discuss how to respond. Hayes was in the room, along with Ford and Emma. This could be a trap, Ford said. They could be using intermediaries to locate us. Possibly, Emma said. But they are not fighters, they are traders. They have no military force. They care about profit, not conquest. If they wanted to harm us, they would simply tell where we are. They would not bother with this message. "So what do we do?" asked. "We talk," Emma said. "We let them know that Earth is open to negotiation. We do not show weakness, but we do not show aggression. We show that we are a civilization willing to engage with others." The decision was made to respond to but not immediately. First, Earth had to prepare. Ships were sent to positions near the trade routes. Military vessels were placed on alert. The population was briefed on what was happening. Emma was chosen to be the negotiator. At 19 years old, she would speak for humanity to another species. The responsibility was enormous, but she accepted it without hesitation. The meeting took place on a neutral station in deep space. Emma arrived with a security detail and 2 diplomats. The representative was a creature with 6 arms and a body that seemed to be made of flexible material. It communicated through clicks and chirps that were translated by computers into English. "I am Trader," the being said. "I have traveled across many systems. I have met many species. I am interested in what humanity has to offer." "Humanity has much to offer," Emma said. "We have technology, we have culture, we have people willing to work and build and create. What we are interested in is peace and fair trade." Peace clicked. That is an interesting concept. Most species are more interested in power. "Humanity learned about power recently," Emma said. "We learned that power is useful only when it is directed towards something valuable. We use our power to protect our young, to build our civilization, to survive. If we trade with it will be because the trade benefits both of us." Was quiet for a moment. Then it made sounds that Emma's translator identified as laughter. "You are young," said. "All of you are young, yet you speak with confidence. Do you not fear the galaxy?" "We fear many things," Emma said. "But we have learned that fear does not stop us. We will trade, we will build, we will become stronger. And if anyone tries to take from us what we have earned, we will burn the stars to protect it." The statement was simple and direct, understood. They would remember that humans were young but strong. They would remember that humans were willing to sacrifice. They would remember that humans should not be underestimated. Over the following months, trade began. Ships arrived at Earth carrying technology and resources. Human ships left carrying manufactured goods and information. The exchange was beneficial for both species. But more importantly, it established Earth as a civilization that was open to the galaxy while remaining strong and independent. The Empire watched these developments with concern. They had expected humanity to either be destroyed or retreat into their home system. Instead, humans were building ships, engaging in trade, and becoming stronger every day. The military commanders wanted to send a fleet to crush this threat before it grew too powerful, but the political leaders hesitated. The galaxy had changed after the rescue mission. Other species had begun to question authority. 3 colonies had revolted. 2 vassal states had broken away. The Empire was dealing with internal conflicts that required military attention. They could not afford to fight a war against a distant world that was not yet a direct threat. Back on Earth, Hayes met with the government leadership. They were discussing plans for the next phase of human expansion into space. "We need more colonies," he said. "We need to establish settlements on planets outside the solar system. We need to show the galaxy that we are serious about becoming a spacefaring civilization." "How many ships can we build?" the president asked. "As many as we need," said. "Our industrial capacity is growing every month. Within a year we could have 10 times as many ships. Within 5 years, 100 times. Humanity knows how to build. We know how to work together. All we need is time." "Time is the one thing the might not give us," said. "They are wounded now, but they are not dead. The Empire has survived longer than any civilization we have encountered. They will eventually recover. When they do, they will come after us. We need to be ready." The decision was made. Earth would accelerate its space program. Ships would be built faster. Colonies would be established. The military would be expanded. Humanity would prepare for the conflict that everyone knew was coming. Emma stood on the observation deck of a ship bound for the first permanent human colony outside the solar system. She looked at Earth as it receded into the distance. She thought about the children who had been taken. She thought about the rescue mission. She thought about how far humanity had come in such a short time. Joined her at the window. He was old enough now to understand what was happening, old enough to help. He had volunteered to be part of the first colony team. "Do you think they will come back?" he asked. "Yes," Emma said. "I think they will, but we will be ready. We will be stronger. and they will learn that taking humanity's children was the biggest mistake the Empire ever made. Nodded, he understood. Every child who had been rescued understood. They had been through the darkness and they had come out the other side. They carried that knowledge. They carried that strength. They carried the memory of what sacrifice meant. The ship moved forward through space, leaving behind the solar system that had birthed humanity. Below, on Earth, Hayes looked at the stars and thought about the future. It would be a future filled with challenge. It would be a future filled with danger. But it would also be a future that humanity had earned. The galaxy had learned not to underestimate humans. They had learned that lesson at terrible cost. But the lesson was learned. And humanity would never be enslaved again. They would never again be seen as primitive. They would never again be taken for granted. They had come to the stars. They had rescued their children. And they had changed the galaxy forever. The stars remembered. And they would burn before humanity let anyone forget. And there is no force more dangerous in the galaxy than a species willing to burn the stars themselves to protect the young. Emma stood with and looked at the stars through the observation window. They were leaving behind a world of darkness and pain. They were going toward something unknown, but they were alive, and they were together. Ave built, we will burn your ships, we will shatter your stations, we will bring down your command centers, and we will take our children from the ashes of your empire. He looked at Ford. Begin the assault. The new dawn moved forward, and for the first time, realized they were no longer alone in their arrogance. Humanity had come to the stars. They had to reverse engineer alien technology and do the impossible. On Prime, the children continued to survive. Emma organized them better every day, learned the layout of the facility, held on to hope in the mines, and continued to watch, to measure, and slowly to doubt the Empire's certainty that humanity was weak. The stars did not know yet that they were about to burn. Sing yet, but it was running on fumes. An aide brought him a message. The government wanted to see him, not to arrest him, to ask for his help, because in 12 hours someone had to decide how humanity would survive. Hayes looked at the aide and asked one question. How much time do we have before we go after them? The aide did not answer, but they both knew the truth. Humanity had no space capabilities that mattered, no weapons that could reach beyond orbit, no technology that could match what had taken their children. They had only one thing. They had the will to get them back or burn trying.